Welcome back. A recent report from research analysts at Exotics Partners London indicates that Nigerian banks are navigating current economic challenges better than anticipated. According to the report, despite Nigeria's economic challenges, the current mood amongst Nigerian banks is far more upbeat than it was a year ago. Well, we hope to get the author of this report, Tolu Alamutu, analyst at Exotics Partners, to tell us more. I guess Tolu is back to us. Good afternoon, Tolu. Thank you very much for joining us.
Good afternoon, and thank you for having me.
Right. You put this report together and you titled it, Nigerian Banks Never Say Die. Why that optimism expressed in that report?
Right. The report comes after an investor trip that we hosted to Lagos and to Abuja last week. We actually had 11 clients with us, which I think shows the level of interest that there is in all things Nigeria. And the comments that we got from the management of the major banks was that they are prepared for further Naira weakness. They're also prepared for further weakness in asset quality metrics. And I think that the investor group that we went with came away a lot more positive from that trip than we had anticipated, given obviously all the negative headlines that there are about Nigeria sometimes in the international press.
Now, how do you situate the new capital raising of some of the big banks vis-a-vis the optimism? For instance, Zenith Bank is seeking approval to raise 100 billion naira.
From a credit perspective, I think it's actually positive that Zenith Bank is seeking that approval. I think it's prudent for banks to consider raising capital at this point should we have further Naira weakness. As credit investors, obviously the capital boost would rank underneath, the bonds that people have outstanding or bonds that people hold, rather. So I think it would be seen as a good move from the credit perspective. Zenith Bank has very strong capital ratios. The results earlier this week were very strong. They're still extremely profitable. The total capital ratio was about 23% compared to the regulatory requirement of about 15%. So I think what management is doing is saying, look, we don't need capital right now, but if we decide to do a capital raise sometime in the future, we would like to have that approval in place already, which, again, I think is a positive thing for credit investors.
Now, talking about Zenith Bank's earning, which of course was impressive, does that indicate better earnings for other tier one banks like GT Bank, Access, and the rest of them?
Well, we hope that that is a sign of good things to come, but I guess we'll just have to wait for the figures to be released. In terms of our recommendations at the moment, we have a buy recommendation on the Zenith Bank Eurobond, also on the GT Bank Eurobond, and on the two Access Bank 21s, which I guess indicates that we expect the results to be decent from those issuers.
Now, in your report, you mentioned risks to consider, such as the weakness of some small banks, delays in implementing the long-anticipated economic recovery plans, and of course, headlines related to the president's health. Talk to us about these. How do they pose a risk to the Nigerian banks?
Okay. A lot of the questions that were asked during the trip related to the president's health. Obviously, it's not yet clear when he will return and what the plans are in terms of some succession and so on. So that is still a risk. It's difficult to sort of assess that in any kind of model. Then the economic growth and recovery plan is something that I think a lot of investors have waited for some time. We are hoping that it comes through in the next few weeks, and I think it could actually be a catalyst in terms of investors knowing where the economy is going, what the government will be focusing on as well. So those are sort of two of the key risks for the credit markets, I think.
Now, just before I let you go, Tolu, what is your general outlook for Nigerian banking sector?
Our general view is actually a little bit more positive than it was going into the trip. I think that the banks still face a lot of challenges this year. As we note in the piece, I think that capital ratios at most banks are more likely to go down than up. I think that asset quality will come under some more pressure this year as well. But my view is that at least the major banks seem quite well prepared for those challenges, whether that's further naira weakness or lower capital ratios or further asset quality deterioration. So there are challenges, but the banks seem to be quite well placed to manage those challenges. And I'm talking primarily about the major banks, of course.
Well, thank you very much, Tolu, for your time. We all here in Nigeria are quite optimistic about the economy. Thank you very much, Tolu, for your time. Tolu Alamutu, analyst at Exotics Partners, London. We move over now to Kenya, where the film industry has been growing demand for domestic production since a directive by the government to broadcasters telling them to air a minimum of 40% local content. Our filmmaker and entrepreneur Paul Kehaho is playing his part in the boom by building equipment at home and giving filmmakers access to cheaper props.
At a studio in Kenya's capital, Nairobi, a 29-year-old Paul Kinwa filmed himself trying out a new camera dolly made from locally sourced materials. It's just one of various film props created by Kinwa in his quest to provide local solutions for filmmakers who struggle to find and afford imported gear. Kinwa used his love for film and a knack for metalwork to teach himself how to build the equipment and started his company, Protesa Creations, in 2014.
I have always known metalwork, even though I never studied for it. My father was a blacksmith and a mechanic, and he had many tools, and I just loved them and what he did. So I learned from him. When it comes to video, I also never went to any formal school. The problem in film is equipment, because it can be very expensive, and I decided to come up with a locally available and affordable solution.
The growth of Kenya's film industry has been slow, although lately it's seen increased interest and activity. Screens have for years been dominated by Nigerian soaps, churned out in the thousands by Africa's largest film industry, Nollywood, as well as Latin American telenovelas and Hollywood productions. But then, Kenya moved to boost domestic production by requiring TV stations to show at least 40% local content.
There's no film school in Kenya. There is no film school in Kenya that can teach you how to make a slider, how to make a jig, how to repair a tripod. Most of these film schools actually do not have even that slider or most of the production equipment we are using. Somebody like Protesa, I think, it is an inborn talent, so we need to support those inborn talents. And film, I think, the more you are doing things on the set, the more experience you are getting.
And that's it on the program. Thank you very much for being part of it. I'm Chimize Obiwago.